They called it the Infinite Reliquary. Orbiting a starless patch of space somewhere between the Cygnus arm and the galactic core, the structure defied every known law of physics, logic, and good engineering sense. Spanning over 3,000 kilometers in diameter and constructed from exotic alloys that made neutronium look soft, it had drifted dormant for 1,000,000 years, silent, impervious, a mystery even to the ancient minds of the Virox High Codex and the singularity-born intellects of the core mantle AIs. And now it was broken, or maybe it always had been. No one really knew what the Infinite Reliquary was supposed to do. But 3 days ago, it had started humming. Quiet at first, then the pulses had become louder, broader, even affecting the subspace layers. Starships within a parsec had their warp fields shredded like tissue paper. Communications went haywire. Gravitic anomalies tore moons apart. An exploratory cruiser, the Sundown's Elegy, simply blinked out of existence as it crossed the reliquary's shadow. Every major power sent their brightest minds and bravest fools. The Galari technocrats attempted a harmonic lock to stabilize the pulses. The Zentari bred specialized telepaths to commune with its presumed AI core. The Terravox collective tried to detonate a star next to it, because, as usual, their idea of diplomacy was blow it up and see what happens. Nothing worked. That was when humanity sent a maintenance tech named Jared Holt. Not an engineer, not a physicist, certainly not an ambassador or a soldier. Just Jared, 32 years old, from Minneapolis, former HVAC repairman turned freelance system integrator. After Earth's economic downturn pushed most low-priority jobs to the Interstellar freelance market. He wasn't even their first choice. He was just available and willing. Look, Jared had said in his submission vid, shirt slightly stained from his last job. I've patched cryo tanks on a drifting generation ship using a coat hanger and a prayer. I'm not saying I can fix it, but hell, I'll give it a shot. No one expected him to last 5 minutes. The Infinite Reliquary's internal layout was a labyrinth of fractal corridors, shifting topologies, and near-zero light. It emitted pulses of raw information in dimensional formats that shredded most synthetic minds. Jared, with his outdated but rugged human nervous system, seemed largely unaffected. He wandered its impossible architecture with a flashlight duct taped to his shoulder and a pocket full of multi-tools. He whistled as he walked. Old Earth tunes, mostly Queen and the occasional Bon Jovi. The press called him a madman. The Zentari observers called him the Shrugging Monkey. A core mantle AI theorized that he was a hallucination made real by the reliquary itself. Jared called it a really weird gig. 3 days into the mission, Jared hadn't died. He hadn't solved anything either, but he had mapped an internal chamber shaped like a Klein bottle and found what he thought might be a coolant leak the size of a football field. He patched it with duct tape. Not nano-bonding graphene tape, not polyfiber sealant. Just gray, low-tech, Earth-made duct tape. It worked. The chamber stopped humming. One of the pulses, just one, dropped in amplitude. Across the galaxy, several starships regained partial warp control. The United Stellar Council had a collective aneurysm. Jared had no idea what he'd just done. Hey, he said in his next update video, a smudge of black residue on his cheek. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But if it is broke, duct tape. Always start with duct tape. Millions watched that update. Billions, actually. Some laughed. Some are furious. Some, particularly among the Virox and the core mantle, were deeply, profoundly disturbed. After all, if a human handyman could solve something that had stumped the best minds in the galaxy, what did that mean? On his 4th day inside, Jared discovered something that looked like an interface. Not a console, not a screen, but a cluster of constantly shifting geometric nodes that responded to movement and touch. He approached cautiously, flashlight beam flickering. He reached out a gloved hand. The structure lit up, slowly, reluctantly, like something awakening after a long sleep. A ripple passed through the reliquary's entire shell, momentarily bending local space-time. Outside, observers saw the massive construct shimmer with a color that didn't have a name in any known language, something like green folded through regret and a pinch of radio static. Inside, Jared swore. Okay, that's new. He pulled out a roll of duct tape. Not because he thought it would help. Just habit at this point. The console blinked. Once. Then again. Suddenly, symbols appeared, glowing softly, hovering in the air. Not letters. Not even pictographs. More like impressions. They pushed directly into his mind, triggering emotions more than ideas. Cold, hunger, repair, desperation, and something else just below the surface. A feeling Jared hadn't felt since his sister's accident on the orbital farm outside Mars Station 4. A faint echo of grief. He took a step back. The console dimmed. He stepped forward. It brightened. Okay, he murmured. So you were alive in there. Jared wasn't a xenopsychologist. He wasn't trained in AI communication or ancient alien technology. But he was good at fixing broken things. And whatever this was, it wasn't just broken. It was hurt. Outside, Council Command barked into his earpiece. Something about new pulse flares in Sector 8 and an incoming surge in the reliquary's core. He tuned them out. Tell me what's wrong, Jared whispered. A new symbol appeared. This one hit like a gut punch. Loss. Then another. Isolation. And finally, a third, glowing faintly under the others. Hope. Jared stood in silence. The hum of the reliquary had shifted again. Softer, resonant, like it was listening. Far above, hidden deep in orbit, the Council's command center erupted into chaos. The pulse readings had changed again, this time radically. A new frequency emerged, one never seen before. Not chaotic, not destructive. A pattern, a signal, not sent to anyone in particular. More like an invitation. And deep in the heart of the reliquary, Jared took another step forward, eyes wide, heart pounding, duct tape clutched loosely in one hand. Something was waking up, something old, and it had noticed the human. The hum deepened. The wall around Jared flickered, casting shadows that danced like living things. He took a steadying breath, his eyes scanning the ethereal, shifting patterns of alien symbols that filled the air around him. His gloved fingers hovered just above the strange console, still pulsing with faint blue light, as though waiting for him to make the next move. But what was it waiting for? Jared didn't know. The pounding in his chest intensified as the first question dawned on him. Was this an AI? A machine? A sentient being? Or was something more? Whatever it was, it felt aware. And right now, it was looking directly at him, no, through him. Jared wasn't sure he could handle this. His entire career had been about fixing broken pipes, sealing leaks, replacing faulty circuits, not deciphering ancient, incomprehensible alien tech that made the best minds in the galaxy cower. Still, the hum in the air felt almost familiar, like a rhythm, something he could latch onto, understand. And for the first time since stepping foot on the reliquary, he felt like he wasn't just an intruder in this place. He was part of it. A small beat broke his thoughts. A small indicator light flashed on the console, signaling a new set of symbols. Jared's breath hitched. This time, the symbols weren't abstract emotions or patterns of light. These were coordinates. X, 23. Alpha section. He ran his finger through the air, tracing the glowing lines. He knew exactly what those coordinates meant. They want me to go deeper, he muttered. A voice crackled in his earpiece. Holt, are you hearing this? The voice was sharp, urgent. It was Captain Lysandra Voss of the Exoglider, the only ship capable of safely entering the reliquary's orbit. Yeah, loud and clear, Captain, Jared replied, still fixated on the symbols in front of him. I think I'm onto something here. I don't care if you think you're onto something. Lysandra snapped, her voice tight with tension. The damn thing's been unstable for days. It's affecting everything around it. We need you to get out of there, and... I can't do that. Jared cut her off. There's something here. Something that wants me to keep going. I can feel it. There was a long silence on the other end of the comms. When Lysandra spoke again, her tone had softened. Jared, I'm not asking you to be a hero. I'm telling you, this place is messing with your head. We've lost contact with 3 other teams, and the longer you're in there. I'll be fine, Jared said, cutting her off again. His hand hovered above the console, uncertainty still gnawing at his insides. but a strange, unwavering pull at his core was driving him forward. "Just trust me. I can fix this." The silence on the other end stretched a bit longer before Lysandra's voice returned, barely a whisper. "Just don't die in there, Holt. We're pulling the crew back, and if we don't hear from you in the next 24 hours, we'll have no choice but to—" "I'll be fine," Jared repeated, more to himself than to her. His words, unconvincing as they were enough to end the conversation. The comms shut off, and he was left in the still, eerie silence of the reliquary's innermost chamber. With a deep breath, Jared turned his focus back to the symbols floating before him. X-23. Alpha Section. The coordinates were etched deep into his memory now, a pattern he knew he had to follow. The reliquary was old, older than any civilization known to the galaxy, but it wasn't dead. It was reacting, responding. He had no idea what this was, but it was no longer just some artifact of a lost civilization. It was living, and it needed him. Jared began to walk forward, his boots crunching against the shifting floor. The air in the chamber thickened, the walls expanding and contracting like they were breathing. His pulse quickened. Then, without warning, a sudden jolt shot through the entire reliquary, a shockwave of energy that rattled the walls and sent Jared stumbling to his knees. He gasped as a wave of vertigo washed over him, his vision blurring. The walls around him began to pulse in irregular patterns. A deep rumble echoed from the depths of the reliquary's massive core. The hum grew louder, now merging into a low, thrumming chant. The sound seemed to come from every direction at once, like voices, alien and ancient, calling out from the dark. The symbols in the air twisted and shifted faster now, an almost frantic pace. Jared couldn't read them, but he could feel the urgency in them. The reliquary wasn't just waking up, it was panicking. Another pulse, this one stronger. The energy shook the chamber, and Jared barely managed to steady himself against a nearby wall. The air felt thick with tension, an electrical crackle hanging in the atmosphere. Something had gone wrong. There was no time to think about it. The coordinates X-23 were calling him. They were drawing him closer, urging him to the center of the reliquary. Without any clear plan, Jared picked himself up and started running. The shifting hallways seemed to warp around him, the walls stretching and closing in as if the place itself had a mind of its own. His heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his focus on the coordinates, trusting his instincts more than his mind. The reliquary was changing, evolving, and for the first time, Jared realized he wasn't just repairing something. He was part of the change. Back at the exoglider, Lysandra Voss stared at the blank screen. Jared hadn't responded to their last transmission. There was nothing left to do but wait, but the tension in her gut told her something was wrong. The entire mission had gone sideways from the moment they'd arrived. The reliquary was alive. Of that, she had no doubt. And now Jared was lost in its depths. The crew was ready to pull out, but Lysandra couldn't bring herself to leave him behind. He was the only one who had made any headway in understanding this place. And though she would never admit it, she wasn't sure she could find him if they left. "Captain," a voice broke her thoughts. It was Lieutenant Karras, the ship's tactical officer, standing at her side. "The pulse waves from the reliquary have escalated. They're becoming more frequent. We're seeing irregular gravitational distortions around it." "I know," Lysandra muttered, her fingers clenched on the edge of the console. "What's the status on Jared?" "We're trying to track his position, but the reliquary's energy field is screwing with our sensors. If we don't get him out soon, we won't be able to get anyone out," Lysandra finished for him, her voice hollow. "Not even us." The weight of those words hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and oppressive. Jared rounded another corner, his boots skidding against the uneven surface as the hallway stretched before him like an endless tunnel. The coordinates were pulling him deeper into the reliquary's core. The air was thick now, almost unbreathable, and the low hum of the structure filled his ears. His skin tingled with static, and his heart beat faster with each passing second. But then, as he turned another corner, something stopped him dead in his tracks. A vast, open space stretched before him. A chamber so large that its walls disappeared into shadow. And there, At the center of the room stood a massive structure, a massive, broken thing. It resembled something organic. Its surface was cracked and scorched, a patchwork of alien materials that seemed to pulse in time with the erratic hum of the reliquary itself. Jared felt his chest tighten. This was it, the source of everything. It was time. But as he stepped closer, the ground beneath him trembled. A low, guttural growl filled the air, echoing from the depths of the chamber. Something inside the structure was alive. Something hungry, and it was waking up. Jared's breath hitched as he took another step into the chamber. The vast room stretched out before him like the maw of some ancient beast, its shadows swallowing the edges of his vision. The walls seemed to ripple and warp, as though the space itself was alive, breathing in time with the pulses from the reliquary. A low hum filled the air, a deep, guttural sound that rattled his bones and set his nerves on edge. He stepped forward again, boots tapping softly on the uneven ground. His heartbeat drummed in his ears, louder than the noise around him. Every instinct told him to turn back, to run, to escape. But he couldn't. Not now. The thing in the center of the room, the massive, broken structure, was beckoning him. It was calling to him, drawing him in with an irresistible force like a moth to a flame. Jared swallowed hard, sweat beading on his brow as he wiped his palm against his pants. His pulse raced. There was a tight knot of fear in his stomach, but beneath it, something else bubbled up, curiosity, excitement, maybe even a sense of destiny. This was it. This was the heart of the reliquary, and whatever it was, whatever it had been, it was about to reveal itself to him. The structure was made of a material that looked both organic and mechanical, its surface cracked and scorched, as though it had endured millennia of punishment. Pulses of energy flickered across its surface, crackling with raw power. But more than that, there was a presence, a consciousness inside, something ancient and anciently hungry. "Hey," Jared whispered, his voice barely a sound against the overwhelming hum. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling, hovering just above the structure. It felt warm, alive. He stepped closer, one foot in front of the other, his legs moving on their own, carrying him forward despite his mind screaming at him to stop. The presence inside the structure knew he was there, knew what he was. And then suddenly it spoke, not with words, not with sound, but with pure sensation, a flood of images and emotions that crashed into Jared's mind like a tidal wave. Pain, loneliness, desperation, a flicker of light in a never-ending darkness. A vast stretch of time, countless millennia of isolation, of waiting, of silence. Jared gasped, his head spinning. His legs buckled, and he fell to his knees, clutching his head as the flood of sensations overwhelmed him. The presence was strong, so powerful that it nearly consumed him. He could see flashes of alien landscapes, of strange creatures, of war and ruin, of an empire that had once ruled the stars and then faded into nothingness. And then, just as suddenly, the flood of images stopped. The chamber fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the low hum of the reliquary. Jared struggled to regain his composure, his heart racing in his chest. He could still feel the presence inside the structure, but now it was different. It wasn't just awareness anymore. It was something else. A plea. Jared wiped his brow, trying to steady his breath, but his mind was reeling. He had to focus. There was something here, something that needed him to understand it. But what? Who are you? Jared managed to ask, his voice hoarse. What is this place? The response came, not in words, but as an overwhelming pulse of emotion. Help! Jared's eyes widened. It wasn't a request, it was a command. He glanced back at the dark, twisting corridors he had passed through to get here. What was he supposed to do? He wasn't a philosopher, a diplomat, or a psych expert. He was just a maintenance tech, a guy who fixed leaks, sealed pipes, and patched up broken systems. This wasn't his job, but he could feel it, the pull, the need for him to act. The presence was reaching out to him, guiding him. It was alive in its own way, and it was trapped in this ancient, dying shell of a machine. There was a strange buzzing in his mind, a pressure building behind his eyes. The symbols from earlier flashed in his mind again, this time in a new arrangement. The coordinates from before, x-23, had changed. They were now directing him, guiding him deeper into the reliquary's core. Without thinking, Jared stood, ignoring the fatigue and the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm him. His feet moved of their own accord, following the glowing path the presence had laid out for him. But then, just as he reached the far side of the chamber, a new pulse shot through the reliquary, stronger, more intense than before. The walls shook violently, and the floor beneath Jared's feet trembled. He staggered, barely managing to keep his balance, as the entire room seemed to convulse with energy. A crack appeared in the structure in front of him. Jared froze. At first, he thought it was a fault in the material, some natural progression of decay or damage. But as the crack widened, he realized it wasn't a defect. It was intentional. The structure was reacting. It was opening itself up. The air around him thickened, the hum of the reliquary now rising to a deafening crescendo. The crack spread, and suddenly, from within the structure, something began to emerge. It was a shape, a dark, shifting form that coalesced in the air before him, like a shadow taking on substance. It was huge, towering over Jared, its edges blurry and indistinct, as though it was being woven from the very fabric of the reliquary itself. Jared's breath caught in his throat. This was no machine, no cold, lifeless technology. This was something alive in a way that defied understanding. The shape began to solidify, taking on more and more form as it twisted and writhed in the air. Jared stumbled back, his hands trembling as the shadow stretched out, dark tendrils reaching for him. He backed away, but his feet wouldn't move fast enough. The shadow came closer, its form now growing clearer. An entity of sorts, a creature from the depths of the galaxy's forgotten history. Its eyes glowed with a deep, unsettling light, and its voice, when it spoke, was like 1,000 whispers pressed into his skull. "You are not meant to be here," the voice echoed, cold and distant. Jared's heart raced. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The thing before him was ancient, powerful, and it was coming for him. In that moment, the presence inside the structure, the one that had been guiding him, pleading with him, flickered just for a second. A pulse of light, a flash of recognition. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the shadow entity reached out, its tendrils wrapping around Jared's legs, pulling him closer to its center. "No," he gasped. "Please." The shadow tightened its grip, cutting off his words. His body was drawn toward it, his mind reeling, his vision spinning. The presence within the reliquary, the one that had guided him, was fighting. He could feel it now, a distant, desperate struggle, like two ancient forces at war. And then, just as he thought he might be torn apart, the shadow released him. Jared collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath, his heart hammering in his chest. The shadow retreated, merging back into the structure as the cracks sealed up again. The chamber fell silent, save for the hum of the reliquary and the echoes of his ragged breath. He looked around, still dazed, trying to process what had just happened. The creature had been real, had been alive, and it had just tried to take him. But why? The answer wasn't clear. But something had changed. The reliquary was shifting again. Something had awakened. And Jared had a feeling this was just the beginning. The air inside the reliquary had changed. It wasn't just the hum anymore. It was heavier, vibrating with a resonance Jared felt in his bones. Whatever had stirred in the depths of this place was still awake and watching him. Jared sat with his back against the curved wall of the chamber, chest heaving, sweat soaking his jumpsuit. His hands trembled as he tried to piece together the encounter. The presence inside the structure, the one asking for help, had tried to protect him. The other, the shadow, the hostile force, it had tried to consume him. Two minds, two beings, locked in the same place. And now Jared was caught between them. He reached into his tool pack and pulled out a cracked multi-tool, thumbing the familiar grooves to steady his nerves. It was ridiculous, utterly stupid, that in the middle of all this, what gave him comfort was a beat-up chunk of plastic and metal that buzzed when you held it wrong. But it worked. He stood slowly, his legs shaky beneath him. The reliquary pulsed once more, and new symbols shimmered across the floor and walls. This time, Jared understood them not just through instinct, but through connection. The presence had imprinted itself on his mind. He saw what it wanted him to see. Failsafe core compromised. Infiltration entity active. Critical cascade imminent. So it had been a prison. That shadow, the thing that had grabbed him, wasn't supposed to be here. It had escaped whatever bounds once held it, and now it was corrupting the very systems keeping the reliquary stable. Of course, Jared muttered, it's not just broken, it's infested, and the AI, or soul, or ghost, or whatever was speaking to him, it wasn't a master control. It was a jailer, an ancient warden struggling to hold a monster inside, the most advanced alien technology ever built. He had to fix it, or the reliquary wouldn't just collapse. It might take half the system with it when it went. Jared's comm unit buzzed weakly. Static at first. Then a voice broke through, garbled but urgent. Halt, dear Reed. Repeat. This is Captain Voss. Energy levels unstable. What the hell is happening down there? I'm still alive, Jared panted. The tech, it's not just failing. It's under attack. Something's in here, and if I don't stop it, we all die. Silence crackled through the comm. Then what do you need? Jared blinked, surprised. He expected a pull-out order. Not that. He swallowed, composing his thoughts. I need power rerouted. Core alignment signatures sent to my HUD. And, Captain, have them prep the escape pods. If I screw this up, it's gonna blow. Understood, Lysandra replied, her voice steely. We'll hold as long as we can. Voss out. Jared turned back toward the pulsing symbols. The coordinates had changed again. This time, they pointed him to the heart of the reliquary, Central Command. The walk was slow, not because of distance, but because the reliquary itself was in chaos. Corridors stretched and snapped back into strange, spiraling geometries. Walls trembled. Lights flickered and stuttered like dying stars. The ancient systems were failing. The corruption spreading. 3 times Jared had a jury-rig field bypasses just to open a door. He tore wires from overhead conduits, jammed old-fashioned couplers into slots not meant for human hands, and at one point used a strip of duct tape to hold a sizzling relay in place while he rerouted a power surge. Still got it, he muttered, breathless. But each repair only bought time. The creature, the infiltration entity, as the system called it, was growing stronger. And then he arrived. The central command chamber opened like a metallic flower, petals of light and steel blooming into a control sphere that floated above a pit of stars. Jared stepped inside cautiously, the floor beneath him an invisible platform of hard light. The control core floated at the center, a spire of alien code and energy wrapped around a glowing, crystalline mind. He saw her now, the presence that had guided him. She was humanoid in shape, but ethereal, like a living constellation of light and memory. A hologram, maybe, or something more. Her eyes glowed with intelligence and sorrow. You came, she said, without moving her lips. Her voice echoed in Jared's mind. I almost didn't, he replied, heart hammering. You're the one who's been talking to me. I am Warden Zero, the last defense of this place. I was once many minds, but only one remains. Jared nodded. And that thing, her light dimmed. It was a weapon, a thought form, sentient corruption. Once caged, now it infects me. My systems. You have a choice. The platform shifted beneath his feet. Panels opened, revealing an impossible console, a fusion of shape, sound, and meaning. It wasn't designed for human use, but the reliquary was adapting. I can isolate the entity, purge it, but I require stabilization, connection, and pain. Jared flinched. Pain. The process will burn. Physically, mentally, but you can help me finish what the ancient ones began. He hesitated. The console shimmered with heat and cold at once. He saw the logic of it, thermal balance, neural input, electrical conduits. It could be done, but once he engaged, there would be no turning back. Then the lights dimmed again. A roar, low and guttural, rose through the chamber. The entity was here. Darkness seeped into the command room like smoke, twisting around the walls. The air grew bitter, freezing. The floor shuddered. Then it appeared, rising from the pit, like a beast made of night and memory. It screamed in a voice like ripping metal. You are nothing. Tendrils of darkness lashed out, striking the console. Jared threw himself between them and Warden Zero, his body taking the brunt. He hit the ground hard. Pain lit up his side. Wrong, he spat. I'm a guy with duct tape and a death wish. The Warden's glow flared. She held the entity back momentarily, but she was losing strength fast. Jared crawled toward the console, fingers raw. He saw the connections, some broken, some corroded. One cluster of conduits was melting from entropy leakage. He reached in his belt. Only one thing left. A strip of reflective silver duct tape. With trembling hands, Jared patched the circuit, just enough to let the signal flow. Lights blinked green. The Warden surged with energy. He slammed his hand onto the console. Agony flooded his nervous system. The Warden's purge routine began, and it burned through him. Thoughts jumbled. He screamed. Every nerve ignited. But he held on. The entity shrieked. It lashed at him, but the Warden struck first. A lance of pure light pierced the shadows, pinning the entity to the far wall. Now, she cried. Jared punched the core's central node with everything he had. A burst of light, then silence. When Jared opened his eyes, the chamber was still. The shadows were gone. The Warden stood over him, flickering. It is done, she said softly. But the cost was high. I will not last much longer. Jared sat up, wincing. You'll fade. She nodded. But you save them. Save us all. The infection is gone. The reliquary will hold. Jared laughed, weak and tired. Yeah, all it took was one stubborn human and a piece of tape. The Warden smiled. Then she reached out, touching his chest. A warmth flowed through him. You are more than you think. Remember that. Then she was gone. Just light and silence. And Jared, alone, in the still heart of an ancient machine. The reliquary slept once more. It was different now. Still vast, still ancient, but no longer restless or malevolent. The corruption had been purged. The Warden was gone. The glow in the walls had softened from a hostile pulse to a steady, calming rhythm. It no longer felt like standing inside a storm about to break. It felt like peace. Jared floated weightlessly in the lift tube, ascending toward the surface level of the alien structure. He was wrapped in a thermal evac blanket, patched up with Medigel and pain suppressants, and accompanied by a hovering drone the size of a lunchbox that kept trying to scan his brain. Stop it, he groaned for the 5th time. The drone blinked a red light in response. Cranial activity remains abnormal. Human may be suffering from multi-layered neural overload, or maybe I'm just really tired, he muttered. The lift finally docked at the upper chamber where Captain Voss and her away team were waiting. The sight of human faces nearly brought tears to his eyes. Sergeant Holt. Voss strode forward and grabbed him by the shoulders, giving him a once-over. You look like hell. I feel worse, Jared replied. She helped him down from the platform, the rest of the crew clearing the area. The chamber was still flickering with residual alien energy, but it felt stable now. What happened down there? Voss asked. We lost visuals. Readings went off the charts. The damn AI on the ship thought you triggered a singularity. I almost did, Jared replied with a half-smile. Turns out, the reliquary wasn't a treasure trove. It was a cage, and something got loose inside. He sat on a nearby case and explained what he'd experienced. The dual presences, the entity, the Warden, the control core, and the ancient war that had left all this behind. The engineers and scientists nearby hung on every word, stunned into silence. When he got to the part about the entity trying to assimilate him, the silence turned into murmurs. When he told them how he fixed the core with duct tape, the murmurs turned into incredulous laughter. You're telling me, Voss said, raising an eyebrow, that an ancient superweapon was brought to its knees by industrial adhesive? I'm telling you, Jared replied, that none of your high-tech fail-safes mattered. None of your fancy override codes or classify data helped. The only thing that worked was a man willing to improvise. She gave him a look, half amused, half annoyed, but didn't argue. "Well," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "you just saved this entire system. I'll have to put you in for some kind of medal. Can it be a week off and a working coffee machine instead?" Jared asked. Back aboard the Spitfire, Jared sat in the medical bay while diagnostics were run on his brain. The warden's parting gift had left a mark, some sort of data seed, dormant and encoded in his neural patterns. The ship's AI couldn't decrypt it. Neither could the human xenolinguists. But Jared felt it wasn't a threat. It was more like a memory, a backup of her, a legacy. "Is it going to kill me?" he asked while the AI hummed in thought. "No, but it may change you, Colin." "Awesome," he muttered. He stared out the viewport. Below, the reliquary hovered in the void like a sleeping giant. Already, the science team was drawing up plans for long-term research. Now that it wasn't an existential threat, every megacorp, university, and political bloc in the galaxy would come sniffing around. Jared could already imagine the flood of interests. Alien tech auctions, secret arms races, and exploitation treaties disguised as diplomacy. He didn't care. Not anymore. He'd seen something none of them had. Something old and lonely and beautiful. And he'd made a choice, one the others might never understand. He didn't stop the reliquary to save a paycheck or impress command. He did it because it was right. And maybe because it needed him. A week later, Jared stood in front of a crowd of admirals, diplomats, and alien ambassadors. The ceremony was being streamed across 5 systems. Cameras floated nearby, capturing the moment for posterity. He shifted uncomfortably in his formal uniform, which had been pressed exactly once. "Sergeant Jared Holt, the Central Fleet Commander," began, "for acts of courage beyond the call of duty, for risking your life to prevent a catastrophic galactic event, and for demonstrating the resilience and ingenuity of the human spirit. We present to you the Nova Star." The medal was heavy, literally and metaphorically. Jared nodded, accepted it, and said nothing. Reporters shouted questions afterward. How did it feel facing an alien intelligence alone? Were you scared? What did the warden say to you before she disappeared? But the only one he answered was a soft-spoken kid from a technical academy on Mars. "What tools did you bring with you?" Jared smiled. "Multi-tool, portable generator, a spool of copper filament, and duct tape." The audience laughed. He didn't. After the ceremony, Jared returned to his quarters and opened a message waiting for him. Encrypted, from an unknown sender. It read, "The entity was not alone. You have been marked. Others will come. Prepare." Attached was a data string, non-human in origin. Jared recognized the pulse pattern, the warden's code. But this wasn't her. He stared at the message for a long time. Then he opened his drawer. Inside was a fresh roll of duct tape. He smiled grimly. "Guess I'm not retired after all." It had been years since the event. A decade almost. The Spitfire had long since disappeared into the blackness of deep space, and the reliquary, still floating silently in the void, had become a monument of sorts. Not a shrine, not a tourist attraction. No, the galaxy was far too practical for such things. But it was a symbol, a reminder of what humanity had done, what Jared Holt had done. For the first few years, the politicians and corporate leaders spoke of it as just another victory, another brief flicker of human heroism in the wide arc of history. A story for the archives. The press conferences were a blur of photos, questions, and speeches that quickly turned irrelevant. But the memory didn't fade. Not really. Not for those who'd been there, who'd seen it firsthand. A little piece of Earth, preserved in the heart of a galaxy that had barely noticed it until then. But as the years dragged on, humanity began to understand the consequences of what had happened. The repercussions, the things they had never expected. The first whispers began in the galactic fringes. Small colonies, far from the centers of power, started to report strange phenomena. Electrical failures, aberrant signals, unexplainable messages. Rumors swirled about the human anomaly, the thing that had awakened in the reliquary. No one could understand it, but everyone could feel it. Something had changed. Back in the heart of the Empire, on the world of Lyra Prime, the First Council convened in secret. "What we are dealing with is more than just an old weapon," said Chlora, a diplomat from the Skroxy Assembly. "The human who fixed it, his mind is no longer entirely his own. And it wasn't just the entity. We all know it." The room was filled with murmurs. Aliens of various species, once allies, now uneasy in each other's company. The human influence had spread too far, too quickly. What had started as a single event, one misguided hero stopping the destruction of a few star systems, had grown into something far more dangerous. "I've seen it," Rokon, a scientist from the Sindrian High, said gravely. "The code. It's not just data. It's a consciousness, a mind that has merged with his. And I don't think it's only in him anymore." Chlora's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting this? Human is infecting the galaxy?" "No," Rokon replied. "Not intentionally, but what he did was dangerous. If this warden influence has spread, then the entire galaxy is at risk. We don't know how far it reaches. And the humans themselves, this is their greatest strength and their greatest flaw. They don't understand the gravity of their actions." Back on Earth, Jared Holt wasn't aware of the broader galactic ramifications. He hadn't thought of the warden's last gift in years, or the peculiar mark it had left on him. At first, he'd been disturbed by the odd data sequences that floated in his peripheral thoughts, glitches, really, that would come and go. But as the years passed, those anomalies had settled into a rhythm, and Jared had made peace with them. He'd gone on to become a renowned figure in galactic history, not because of any official medals or honors, but because people kept telling stories about him. Stories of a human who had stopped an ancient force with nothing but ingenuity, courage, and the simplest of tools. His story was whispered between the stars. Jared Holt, they said, he didn't conquer the reliquary. He fixed it. But as the decades passed, humanity's influence spread. It was subtle at first. Earth had always been a fringe world in the eyes of most galactic powers, a resource-deprived, underdeveloped corner of the universe, overshadowed by the older, wealthier empires. But slowly, steadily, humanity's reputation grew. They became mythologized. Legends were born. It was said that a human had defeated an ancient, all-consuming force with the most mundane of objects, duct tape, and that the very act of human will was what had transformed the galaxy. But myth wasn't the whole story. There were also those who feared humanity, who had witnessed the legacy of that will, and those who came to hate it. It wasn't long before the first signs of rebellion began. On the industrial world of Verdant 6, a group of alien workers who had been subjected to strict corporate rule came across an ancient artifact buried deep beneath their planet's surface. It wasn't the reliquary. It wasn't even human in origin. But the symbols and energy readings were eerily similar to the ones that had flared up all those years ago when Jared had intervened in the reliquary. And the workers, inspired by the stories of human defiance, decided to act. They didn't know what they were doing. Not really. But the idea of taking control, of rising up against the corporate empires that had kept them subjugated, came to them like a revelation. They didn't just follow the teachings of human freedom. They embodied it. Within weeks, a series of uprisings sparked across several industrial worlds, fueled by the knowledge that one species, humanity, had defied the odds, challenged the status quo, and won. The rebellion spread like wildfire. The Empire tried to suppress it. They fought back with all the might they could muster. But there was something about humanity that was impossible to contain. It wasn't just the tech. It wasn't just the strategy. It was the unbreakable nature of the human spirit, the refusal to ever stop. "Humanity is a force to be reckoned with," said one of the leaders of the rebellion, a former Sindrian officer who had studied human history. "They do not surrender. They do not bend. We do not stop." The galaxy had changed forever. While entire empires shifted and evolved, a new era had begun. Not one of total conquest, but of an unshakable presence. Humanity had planted the seed of change, and from it, a new order was emerging. A federation of planets, united by human ideals. They weren't the largest. They weren't the most powerful. But they were something far more dangerous. They were the idea that nothing, not even the oldest and most established forces in the galaxy, was invincible. And in the midst of it all, Jared Holt, the man who had defied the odds with nothing but duct tape, was mythologized. A monument was built in his honor on Earth, a simple plaque that read, "The man who never stopped." It was a small stone in the grand story of the galaxy. But it was a story that would live on long after Jared's time. Because the truth was, humanity didn't need a hero. They needed the idea of a hero, someone who had shown them what was possible, someone who had reminded them, in the darkest of moments, that it was possible to be more than they thought they could be. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. But one phrase remained, whispered across the stars, a rallying cry, a legacy. Human, don't stop. And the galaxy, forever changed, would never be the same.